The ultrasound gel was cold, a shock of synthetic slush against the stretched skin of her stomach, but it was nothing compared to the temperature of the men standing in the corner of the examination room. Nina stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little perforated dots to keep her breathing steady. 1, 2, 3, 4. If she looked down, she would see the swollen curve of her belly, the 7-month reality of a contract that had effectively sold her body to the highest bidder. If she looked left, she would see Dr. Kong, nervous and sweating despite the air conditioning. And if she looked right, she would see him. Kwon Dae-hyun. He was not supposed to be here. The contract, 70 pages of legal iron that Nina had signed with shaking hands in a law firm that smelled of mahogany and old money, stipulated that the intended mother, Choi So-ra, would attend all medical appointments. The intended father was a signature on a check, a donor of genetic material, a distant deity in a skyscraper who wanted an heir but did not have the time to make one the traditional way. Yet, here he was. He wore a suit that cost more than Nina's entire college tuition, charcoal gray and cut so sharp it looked like it could draw blood. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the sterile room. He had not spoken a word since he entered. He just watched. His eyes, dark and devoid of any recognizable warmth, tracked the movements of the ultrasound wand with the focus of a predator watching a pulse in a jugular vein. The heartbeat is strong, Dr. Kong said, his voice pitching a little too high. 140 beats per minute. Perfect. The femur length indicates he's going to be tall, just like. The doctor caught Dae-hyun's gaze and swallowed the rest of the sentence, choking on the informality. Just like his father. Turn the monitor, Dae-hyun commanded. It was not a request. It was an order delivered in a baritone wrapped in velvet and barbed wire. Dr. Kong fumbled to rotate the screen. Nina flinched as the movement tugged the wand against her ribs. She finally looked. There, in the grainy black and white storm, was the reason she had given up drinking, caffeine, and her freedom for nearly a year. The baby. The heir to the Kwon Heavy Industries empire. The $40,000 that would pay off her father's gambling debts and keep her sister in nursing school. Dae-hyun moved. The air in the room shifted, displacing as he walked toward the bed. Nina's breath hitched, trapping itself in her throat like a jagged stone. He stopped inches from her exposed stomach. He did not look at her face. He looked at the screen, then down at her skin. He reached out. Nina's muscles seized. The instinct to curl up, to protect, slammed into her, but she forced herself to remain paralyzed. He owns this, she reminded herself bitterly. He paid for the rental. His hand was large, the fingers long and elegant, a pianist's hands if the pianist played melodies of corporate hostile takeovers. He hovered over her, the heat radiating from his palm searing her skin even without contact. Then, he touched her. It was not the tentative, odd touch of an expectant father. It was heavy. Possessive. His palm flattened over the kick of the baby, claiming the territory. Where is she? Nina whispered. The silence was too loud, the weight of his hand too intimate. Mrs. Kwon. She's usually here. Dae-hyun's eyes finally snapped to hers. They were terrifyingly empty, like looking into the barrel of a gun. There is no Mrs. Kwon, he said. The words dropped into the room like lead weights. Nina blinked, her mind stuttering. I do not understand. Is she sick? She is dead, Dae-hyun said, his voice flat, bored even. As of this morning. A cold wash of horror drenched Nina's spine. So-ra, the petite, nervous woman who always brought Nina organic vitamins and looked at her with a mixture of jealousy and gratitude, was gone. Just like that. I'm so sorry, Nina stammered, trying to sit up, but the weight of his hand pinned her down. Was it an accident? It was a mistake, Dae-hyun said cryptically. He removed his hand, and the loss of heat made Nina shiver violently. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the ultrasound gel from his fingers, then tossed the silk square into the trash bin as if it were contaminated. Get dressed, Nina. We are leaving. Leaving. Nina wiped the rest of the gel off herself with a paper towel, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. I have to go to work. I have a shift at the bakery at 4. Dae-hyun laughed. It was a dark, dry sound, devoid of humor. You are carrying the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. His mother has just been murdered in a botched kidnapping attempt that was likely targeting him. Do you really think I am going to let you go serve croissants in a Queen's storefront? The room spun. Murdered. Kidnapping. The words ricocheted around Nina's skull. I have a contract, she said, her voice trembling but gaining a razor-thin edge of defiance. She was poor, she was tired, and she was heavy with a child that was not hers, but she was not a doormat. The contract says I live in my own apartment until the birth. It says I maintain my own employment as long as it's not physically strenuous. You see, not just change the terms. Dae-hyun stepped into her personal space, towering over her as she swung her legs off the exam table. The scent of him, sandalwood, cold rain, and expensive tobacco, invaded her senses, making her head swim. The contract was with a couple, he said softly, leaning down until his face was level with hers. That entity no longer exists. Now, the contract is with me. And I do not negotiate with my property. I am not your property, Nina hissed, sliding off the table to stand. She was 5'7", not short, but he still made her feel like a child. No, he agreed, his gaze dropping to her stomach, heavy and low. But the container is inseparable from the cargo. He turned to his head of security, a man named Seo Jun who had materialized in the doorway like a shadow. Get her things from the apartment. Burn the rest. She does not go back. Wait. Nina grabbed his arm. It was like grabbing a steel beam wrapped in cashmere. My father. My sister. I see a not just disappear. Dae-hyun looked at her hand on his sleeve. He did not shake it off, he just stared at it until Nina, burning with embarrassment and fear, retracted her fingers. Your father has been moved to a private rehabilitation facility in Switzerland. Fully paid for, Dae-hyun said. Your sister's tuition is covered through her doctorate. They have been informed that you have taken a high-profile private chef position abroad and will be out of contact for 3 months. You kidnapped my family. I upgraded them, he corrected. Just as I am upgrading you. He turned and walked out. Bring her, he said to the heir, knowing the order would be obeyed. The ride to the Kwon estate was a blur of tinted windows and silent terror. Nina sat in the back of the Maybach, the leather seats soft enough to swallow her whole. The door was locked. She had checked. Twice. Dae-hyun sat next to her, tapping on a tablet, completely ignoring her existence. But his thigh brushed against hers every time the car took a turn, sending a jolt of electricity through her that made her stomach churn with a confusing mix of nausea and awareness. She looked out the window as the cityscape of New York faded, replaced by the manicured greenery of the Hamptons. They were not going to the city penthouse. They were going to the fortress. Why me? She asked into the silence. Dae-hyun did not look up from his screen. Explain. You could have hired a surrogate from an agency that specializes in people like you. Why did you pick a broke culinary school dropout with a gambling addict father? He paused, his finger hovering over the glass screen. He turned his head slowly. The afternoon light filtered through the tint, casting half his face in shadow. Because the agencies ask too many questions, he said. And because I needed someone who understands what it means to be hungry. People who have never been hungry are difficult to control. They have principles. Illusions of choice. And you think I do not have principles? Nina challenged, crossing her arms over her chest. I think you have a price, he said simply. Everyone has a price, Nina. Yours was $40,000. A bargain, considering what you are carrying. It's not just biology to you, is it? She whispered. It's a transaction. Everything is a transaction. The car slowed, turning through massive iron gates that looked capable of stopping a tank. They rolled up a winding driveway lined with trees that looked like they had been trimmed with laser levels. The house, no, the palace, loomed at the top of the hill. Gray stone, modern glass, sharp angles. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum for the living. The car stopped. The door opened. "Welcome home," Dae-hyun said, the irony dripping from his voice like poison. Inside, the house was silent. The floors were marble, white and veined with gray, stretching out like a frozen lake. The air was temperature-controlled to a degree that felt unnatural. There were no photos on the walls. No clutter. No life. "Your room is on the second floor, East Wing," Dae-hyun said, handing his coat to a maid who appeared from nowhere. "Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." "I'm not hungry," Nina said, standing in the foyer, clutching her cheap purse like a shield. Dae-hyun stopped halfway to the stairs. He turned. The atmosphere in the massive hall instantly pressurized. He walked back to her, his footsteps echoing like gunshots on the marble. He stopped so close that she had to tilt her head back to see his eyes. He reached out and tucked a stray curl of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jaw, his thumb resting on the pulse point of her neck. He could feel her heart hammering against his skin, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "You are eating for two," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur that vibrated in her chest. "And I do not tolerate damage to my assets due to malnutrition or stubbornness." "I hate you," she breathed. A flicker of something sparked in his eyes. Amusement. Arousal. It was gone before she could name it. "Hate me all you want," he said, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her throat. "Just eat the food." Dinner was a battlefield. The dining table was long enough to seat 20 people. Nina sat at one end, Dae-hyun at the other. The distance between them felt like a canyon, yet his gaze bridged it effortlessly. The meal was laid out in front of her. Steamed fish, blanched spinach, brown rice, a bowl of clear soup. It was healthy. It was perfect. It was tasteless. Nina pushed the rice around with her chopsticks. Her appetite had vanished the moment she realized the windows in her bedroom did not open more than 2 inches. "Child safety locks," the maid had said. "Or prisoner locks." "You are not eating," Dae-hyun's voice carried across the table. "I told you, I'm not hungry." He stood up. He picked up his plate and his glass of wine, a rich, blood-red vintage that taunted her sobriety, and walked the length of the table. He set his place down right next to hers. He sat. The scent of him, that overwhelming mix of power and spice, flooded her space. "Eat," he commanded. "No." Dae-hyun sighed, the sound of a man whose patience was thinning. He reached for her chopsticks, taking them from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, hot and rough. He picked up a piece of the white fish, perfect and flaky. "Open." Nina pressed her lips together. She stared at him, channeling every ounce of defiance she had left. "You bought my womb," she thought. "You did not buy my obedience." Dae-hyun's eyes darkened. He did not shout. He did not threaten to hit her. He did something worse. He dropped the chopsticks. His hand moved to the back of her neck, his large palm cupping her nape, his fingers tangling in her hair. He exerted a steady, unyielding pressure, tilting her head back. "Do not make me force you, Nina," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "Because I will enjoy it, and you will hate yourself for letting me." The threat was somatic, visceral. It sent a shiver racing down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a dark, twisted heat she was not allowed to feel. Her lips parted in a gasp. He seized the moment. He picked up the spoon, scooped some rice and soup, and fed her. She swallowed. She had to. "Good," he murmured, his thumb stroking the nape of her neck. Again. He fed her the entire meal. Bite by bite. Watching her mouth, watching her throat work, watching the humiliation and the confusion war in her eyes. It was intimate. It was degrading. It was the most erotic thing that had ever happened to her. When the plate was clean, he wiped her mouth with his napkin. "See," he said, his voice husky. "Obedience is much more nourishing." "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You have the baby. You have me trapped." Why this?" "Because Sora was a doll," he said, leaning back, swirling his wine. "She was perfect plastic. She did what she was told, she smiled when she was supposed to, and she bored me to tears. He looked at Nina, really looked at her, taking in the flushed cheeks, the messy hair, the fire in her eyes that even fear could not extinguish. "You," he said, "are a mess. You are difficult. You are alive. Is that a compliment?" It's a warning. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the hallway. Voices. Heavy boots. The doors to the dining room burst open. Co. Jun, the security head, rushed in, his face pale. "Sir," he said, breathless. "We have a problem." Dae-hyun did not look away from Nina. "I am eating." "Sir, it's the police," Co. Jun said, urgent. "They are not here for the kidnapping inquiry. They have a warrant." Dae-hyun finally turned, his expression tightening into a mask of stone. "For what?" "For Nina," Co. Jun said. Nina stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the marble. "Me? Why?" Two uniformed officers stepped into the room behind Co. Jun. They looked out of place amidst the luxury, but their hands were on their holsters. "Nina Park?" the older officer asked. "Yes. You are under arrest for the murder of Choi So-ra." The room went silent. The air vanished. Nina grabbed the edge of the table, her knees buckling. "What?" "No. I was at the clinic. I did not." "We have video evidence of you entering her vehicle 2 hours before the crash," the officer said, pulling out cuffs. "And we found the cut brake lines in your locker at the bakery." "That's a lie." Nina screamed. She looked at Dae-hyun. "Tell them. I was with you." "Well, I was at the clinic." "I did not." She looked at him, begging for the savior, the powerful billionaire who could snap his fingers and make the world disappear. Dae-hyun stood up slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at the police, then he looked at Nina. His face was unreadable. A wall of ice. "Dae-hyun." She whispered. He walked over to her. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "I told you everything is a transaction," he whispered. He pulled back and looked at the officers. "Take her," Dae-hyun said coldly. "But be careful. She is carrying my property." Nina screamed as the officers grabbed her. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists. She was dragged away from the table, away from the warmth, watching Dae-hyun stand there, untouched, sipping his red wine as if he were watching a play he had written himself. As they dragged her through the doors, she saw him smile. A small, terrifying smile that said, "Now you have nowhere left to run but to me." The holding cell smelled of bleach, old urine, and the metallic tang of despair. It was a sensory assault that made Nina's stomach roil, the nausea rising in her throat like a bitter tide. She sat on the thin, plastic mattress, her knees pulled up to her chest as much as her swollen belly would allow, shivering despite the humid, stagnant air. 48 hours. That's how long she had been in the system. Processed like cattle. Fingerprinted. Mugshot taken, the flash blinding her, freezing her humiliation in digital perpetuity. They had taken her clothes, her comfortable maternity leggings and the oversized sweater, and replaced them with a stiff, orange jumpsuit that chafed against her stretched skin. Nina Park. Visitor. The guard's voice was bored, scraping against the silence. Nina did not look up. Her father. Her sister. No, Dae-hyun had sent them away. There was no one left. Move it. She was led down a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity, her shackles clinking with a rhythm that sounded like a death knell. They pushed her into an interrogation room. It was not the one she'd been questioned in before. This one was different. The camera in the corner was covered with a piece of duct tape. The two-way mirror was blocked by a pulled blind. And sitting at the metal table, looking as out of place as a diamond in a gutter, was Kwon Dae-hyun. He was not wearing a suit today. He wore a black turtleneck and black trousers, the darkness of his attire absorbing the harsh fluorescent light. He looked rested. He looked clean. He looked like a god who had descended into hell merely to inspect the plumbing. The guard uncuffed Nina and left, closing the heavy steel door with a hollow thud. Nina stood by the door, rubbing her raw wrists. She did not sit. She could not bring herself to be closer to him. "You look terrible," Dae-hyun said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if commenting on the weather. "I'm in jail for a murder I did not commit," Nina rasped. Her voice was wrecked from hours of crying and then hours of screaming her innocence to detectives who did not care. "Because you let them take me." "I did," he admitted. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." "You re-swollen." "I'd rather stand." "Sit, Nina." The command was not loud, but it carried the weight of a collapsing building. "Or I will have the guards come back and shackle you to the chair." Nina sat. Her legs were trembling anyway. She lowered herself slowly, wincing as her lower back protested. Dae-hyun reached into a paper bag on the floor and pulled out a thermos. He unscrewed the lid, and steam curled into the cold air, rich, savory, smelling of roasted chicken and ginseng. He poured a cup and slid it across the metal table. "Drink. It's samjitang. Good for stamina." Nina stared at the soup. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a traitorous, biological response she could not control. "I do not want your soup. I want a lawyer." "You have the best lawyers in the country," Dae-hyun said, watching the steam rise. "They are currently upstairs negotiating the terms of your release." "Release?" Hope, sharp and painful, pierced her chest. "They found the real killer." Dae-hyun's lips quirked, a microscopic movement. "No. The evidence against you is quite damning. The brake lines. The video footage. The motive, money. I did not do it. I know." He took a sip from his own cup, his eyes locked on hers. "Because I know who did." The room seemed to tilt. Nina gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "You know. And you let me sit in here for 2 days. You let them treat me like an animal while you knew." "I needed you to understand," Dae-hyun said softly. He leaned forward, the predator closing the distance. "I needed you to see the alternative. Out there, Nina, without me, you are nothing. You are a poor, pregnant girl with a criminal record and a dead family waiting for her if she fails. The system will eat you alive. It will chew you up and spit out my son in a state foster home." He reached across the table. His hand, warm and large, covered hers. She tried to pull away, but he held her fast. "But with me," he continued, his thumb rubbing the back of her hand, "you are untouchable. I am the only thing standing between you and a life sentence. Do you understand now?" "You re a monster," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "I am a necessity." He released her hand and pointed to the soup. "Drink. We leave in 10 minutes. To go where?" "Home. House arrest." The judge agreed that the prison environment is detrimental to the asset. "You will be confined to my estate until the trial." "And when is the trial?" Dae-hyun smiled again, that terrifying, empty smile. "There will not be a trial. The evidence will eventually be found to be circumstantial. A witness will recant. The footage will be proven corrupted. But that takes time. And during that time, you will be mine. Completely." The return to the Kwon estate felt less like a homecoming and more like being swallowed by a whale. The gates closed behind the Maybach with a finality that settled deep in Nina's bones. She was exhausted. Her body felt heavy, her skin grime-coated, her spirit fractured. Dae-hyun did not speak during the drive, but his presence was a constant weight against her side. He was typing on his phone, issuing orders, dismantling lives or building empires, she did not know which. When they entered the foyer, the staff was lined up. They did not look at her. They looked at the floor. "Prepare a bath," Dae-hyun ordered the head maid. "And burn these clothes." He looked at Nina, huddled in her oversized gray sweats the lawyer had brought her. "Go upstairs. Wash the prison off you. You smell like fear." Nina climbed the stairs, every step a monumental effort. In the bathroom attached to her room, her cell, a massive stone tub was filling with steaming water. Scented oils, lavender and chamomile, wafted through the air, trying to mask the reality of her situation. She stripped off the clothes, catching sight of herself in the mirror. Her belly was huge, tight and low. Bruises bloomed on her wrists from the cuffs. Her eyes were hollow, surrounded by dark circles that looked like bruises. She sank into the water. It burned, a welcome pain that drowned out the numbness. She closed her eyes, floating, wishing she could just dissolve. You missed a spot. Nina's eyes snapped open. Dae-hyun was standing in the doorway. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and veined with power. Get out, she said, pulling her knees up to cover herself. Please. He ignored her. He walked to the edge of the tub, picked up a sponge, and soaked it in the soapy water. Lean forward. No. Nina. His voice dropped an octave. It was not a shout. It was a vibration that traveled through the water and into her skin. I am not asking to look. I am telling you that you cannot reach your back, and I will not have you sleeping in my sheets with the filth of that cell on your skin. She stared at him, hatred and exhaustion warring in her chest. Exhaustion won. It always won lately. She leaned forward, resting her forehead on her crossed arms on the rim of the tub. She felt the water shift as he dipped the sponge again. Then, the warm, rough texture against her spine. He scrubbed. He did not caress. He cleaned her with efficient, firm strokes. Up her spine, over her shoulder blades, down to the small of her back. The somatic sensation was overwhelming, the heat of the water, the strength of his hand, the confusing intimacy of being naked before the men who had effectively enslaved her. Who killed her? Nina whispered into her arms. Who killed So-ra? Dae-hyun's hand paused over her shoulder blade. For a moment, she thought he would not answer. Her brother, he said. Nina turned her head, water dripping from her hair. Her brother. Why? Because So-ra was going to leave him out of the will. And because he is a greedy, short-sighted fool who thought he could frame the surrogate and pressure me into a settlement. Dae-hyun resumed scrubbing, harder now. He did not realize that I do not settle. If you know it's him, why am I still the suspect? Because I need him to think he's won. I need him to feel safe. When a man feels safe, he makes mistakes. He reveals his partners. Dae-hyun dropped the sponge. He reached for a pitcher of warm water. Close your eyes. He poured the water over her head, rinsing the shampoo she had not realized he de-applied. His fingers massaged her scalp, deep, digging into the tension points. It felt divine. It felt wrong. You reusing me as bait, she realized, the water running down her face like tears. I am using you as a distraction, he corrected. He turned off the tap. Stand up. He held out a towel. A massive, fluffy sheet of white cotton. Nina stood, water cascading off her swollen form. She felt no shame anymore, only a heavy resignation. He wrapped her in the towel, tucking the ends in, patting her dry with brisk, impersonal movements that somehow felt more possessive than a lover's touch. Get dressed, he said, turning away. I have work to do. And you need to sleep. The baby has been stressed enough. The weeks that followed were a blur of golden captivity. Nina was not allowed to leave the house. An ankle monitor, sleek and black, blinked against her skin, a condition of her bail, orchestrated by Dae-hyun's legal team. She was a prisoner in a palace. But the dynamic had shifted. Dae-hyun did not ignore her anymore. He watched her. Constantly. He moved his office to the library on the main floor, leaving the doors open so he could see her as she paced the hallway or sat in the garden atrium. He controlled her diet with obsessive precision. No caffeine. No raw fish. High iron. High protein. He hired a private chef to replace the one he fired, but he often plated the food himself, placing it in front of her with that silent command, eat. And she did. She ate because the baby kicked harder every day, a reminder that she was not just keeping herself alive. One rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks into her confinement, Nina found the file. Dae-hyun was in a video conference with his board in Tokyo. He had left his study door ajar. Nina, bored and restless, had wandered in. Her intention was not to snoop, she just wanted a book. But the folder was sitting on his mahogany desk, red and marked confidential. She opened it. It was not about the company. It was not about the murder. It was about her. Photos of her from high school. Her college transcripts. A breakdown of her father's gambling debts. Surveillance photos of her walking to the bakery months before the surrogacy agency had even contacted her. She flipped the pages, her heart hammering against her ribs. There were medical records. Her medical records. Subject, Nina Park. Genetic compatibility, 99.8%. Blood type, O negative. Notes, resilient psychological profile. High pain threshold. Desperate financial situation ensures compliance. He had not just picked her from a binder. He had hunted her. It's impolite to read other people's mail. Nina jumped, the file slipping from her hands and scattering across the Persian rug. Dae-hyun stood in the doorway. He had ended his call. He walked into the room, unbuttoning his cuffs, his face an unreadable mask of calm. You stalked me, Nina breathed, backing away until her legs hit the leather sofa. You did not just hire a surrogate. You targeted me. I selected the best candidate, Dae-hyun said, bending down to pick up the papers. He organized them meticulously, tapping the edges on the desk to straighten them. My son requires the best genetic material. And the best environment. I'm not an environment. I'm a person. Are you? He looked at her, his eyes traveling over her body. Right now, you are a vessel. A very expensive, very beautiful vessel. Is that why you did not care about surrogate? Nina accused. Because she was just a prop. Did you even want a wife? I wanted an heir, Dae-hyun said, his voice dropping to a growl. He stalked toward her. I wanted a legacy. Surrogate was necessary for the public image. But she was weak. You. He stopped inches from her, trapping her against the sofa. He placed a hand on the wall beside her head, leaning in. He smelled of rain and ink. You are strong, Nina. You fight. I like that you fight. I hate you, she spat, her hands clenching into fists to stop from trembling. Good. His gaze dropped to her mouth. Hate is a passion. Indifference is what I cannot tolerate. He leaned closer, his face tilting. For a terrifying, electrifying second, Nina thought he was going to kiss her. Her breath hitched. Her body betrayed her, leaning imperceptibly toward his heat. Crack. The sound of glass shattering echoed from the front of the house. Dae-hyun froze. His head snapped toward the hallway. The predator was instantly alert. Boom. A deeper sound. An explosion. The front gates. Get down, Dae-hyun hissed. The velvet was gone. This was pure steel. He grabbed Nina by the arm, hauling her off the sofa and shoving her behind the heavy oak desk. Stay there. Do not move. Do not make a sound. He reached under the desk and pulled out a gun. A sleek, black semi-automatic that looked like it belonged in his hand more than a pen ever did. Dae-hyun. Nina whispered, terror seizing her throat. Who is it? Surrogate's brother, he said, checking the chamber. He realized I was not settling. So he decided to liquidate the asset. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a ferocity that made her blood turn to ice. He's here for the baby. He's here to cut him out. Nina's hands flew to her stomach protectively. No. I would not let him, Dae-hyun vowed. He touched her cheek, his thumb smearing a tear she had not felt fall. I told you, Nina. I protect what is mine. He moved to the door, gun raised. Co June. Status. Breach at the north gate. Co June's voice crackled over the intercom, followed by the sound of automatic gunfire. They have a truck. 6 hostiles inside the perimeter. Dae-hyun looked back at Nina. Stay. Put. He disappeared into the hallway. Nina huddled under the desk, her knees pressed into the carpet. She could hear shouting. Screams. The distinct pop-pop-pop of gunfire getting closer. She squeezed her eyes shut, rocking back and forth. Save us. Save us. A heavy thud shook the floorboards above her. Then another. Footsteps running. The library door kicked open. Nina clamped a hand over her mouth. Through the gap under the desk, she saw boots. Muddy, heavy combat boots. Not Dae-hyun's Italian leather. Check the room, a rough voice said in Korean. The boss wants the girl alive until the doctor gets here. Then who cares? Nina's heart stopped. The doctor. They brought a doctor to take the baby. The boots moved closer. They were circling the desk. Nina looked around frantically. A letter opener. It was lying on the carpet where it had fallen with the file. It was silver, sharp, lethal. She reached for it. Her fingers brushed the cold metal. The boots stopped. Gotcha. A hand reached down, grabbing her by the hair. Nina screamed, slashing upward with the letter opener. The blade sank into the man's forearm. He roared, dropping her. Nina scrambled back, kicking out, but another man was there. He grabbed her legs. Get off me, she shrieked, kicking wildly. Her foot connected with a jaw, but they were too strong. They dragged her out from under the desk. Hold her down, the wounded man yelled, blood dripping from his arm. Sedate her. A needle glinted in the light. Bang. The man holding the needle went rigid. A red flower bloomed in the center of his forehead. He dropped like a stone. Nina looked up. Dae-hyun stood in the doorway. He was bleeding from a cut on his temple, blood tracking down his cheek like war paint. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was stained with red. He looked like a demon rising from the pit. He did not speak. He fired again. Bang. The second man, the one holding Nina's legs, took a bullet to the shoulder and spun away, crashing into the bookshelf. Dae-hyun walked into the room, stepping over the dead body. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. He reached the wounded man on the floor, aimed, and put a final bullet in his leg to immobilize him. Then he was on his knees beside Nina. Did they touch you? He demanded, his hands hovering over her, checking for wounds. His eyes were wild, the pupils blown wide with adrenaline and rage. Did they hurt him? I stabbed him, Nina stammered, pointing at the groaning man. She was shaking so hard her teeth clattered. Dae-hyun looked at the letter opener in her hand, coated in blood. A dark, savage pride flashed across his face. Good girl, he breathed. He pulled her into his arms. He crushed her against his chest, heedless of the blood on his shirt. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply, his heart hammering against hers like a war drum. I thought. His voice cracked. The somatic break in his composure was more terrifying than the violence. I thought I lost you. For the first time, Nina did not pull away. She clung to him. She grabbed his shirt, her bloody fingers staining the white fabric. He was a monster. He was a killer. But in this chaos, in this violent storm, he was the only solid thing in the world. My water, she gasped, a sudden, sharp pain ripping through her abdomen. Dae-hyun pulled back, his eyes snapping to hers. What? I think. Nina cried out as another contraction seized her, hard and fast, stealing her breath. My water broke. Dae-hyun looked down. The Persian rug beneath her was darkening with fluid. It's too early, he said, his face paling beneath the blood. It's only 32 weeks. He's coming, Nina sobbed, the pain doubling her over. Dae-hyun, he's coming now. Dae-hyun looked at the door. The sounds of fighting had faded, but smoke was drifting down the hallway. The house was compromised. The roads would be blocked. We see not go to the hospital, he said, his voice turning to steel. They will be waiting on the road. He scooped her up into his arms. She was heavy, dead weight, but he lifted her as if she were made of air. Where? She gasped. The safe room, he said, kicking the library door shut behind them as he carried her toward the hidden panel in the wall. I will bring the baby into this world myself if I have to. He looked down at her, his eyes blazing with a promise that terrified and thrilled her. Hold on to me, Nina. I have you. I will not let you go. The safe room was a vault of silence buried beneath the chaos of the estate. The walls were reinforced steel lined with soundproofing foam, cutting off the screams and the gunfire from the world above. The air was recycled, cool and sterile, smelling of ozone and bottled oxygen. But inside, the air was hot, heavy with the scent of copper and sweat. Nina screamed, a raw, animalistic sound that tore through her throat and bounced off the metal walls. Her back arched off the medical cot Dae-hyun had laid her on, her fingers clawing at the sterile sheets. "Breathe," Dae-hyun commanded. He was at the foot of the bed, his sleeves rolled up past his elbows, his hands, those hands that signed billion-dollar mergers, stained with her blood. "Nina, look at me. Look at me." She gasped, her eyes rolling back, finding his face in the haze of agony. He was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, the cut on his temple still sluggishly bleeding. The monster was gone. The billionaire was gone. There was only a man, terrified and focused, trying to pull life from the jaws of death. "It hurts," she sobbed, her body seizing with another contraction that felt like it was splitting her pelvis in two. "I see a not, he's too early. I see a not. You can. You will." His voice was a lifeline, rough and somatic, vibrating against her skin. "I did not kill 6 men upstairs for you to give up on me now." He grabbed a sterile towel from the emergency kit, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. "I can see the head. He is small, Nina. He is so small. You have to push. Now." "I am scared," she whispered, the confession broken. "I know." He moved to the side of the bed, grabbing her hand. He squeezed it hard, bone grinding against bone, grounding her pain in his strength. "I am scared too. Push." Nina screamed again, bearing down, pouring every ounce of her remaining strength into the effort. The world narrowed down to a single point of blinding white pain. She felt her body tear, felt the impossible pressure give way. And then, nothing. The silence in the room was deafening. It was heavier than the steel door. It pressed against Nina's eardrums, louder than the gunfire had ever been. "Dae-hyun," she rasped, trying to lift her head. "Why is not he crying?" Dae-hyun stood frozen at the foot of the bed. In his hands, he held a small, purple stillness. The baby was tiny, fragile as a bird, coated in the slick fluids of birth. Limp. "No," Dae-hyun whispered. It was a sound of pure devastation. "No. You do not get to die. I forbid it." He moved to the small table, laying the infant down on the clean towels. He did not look like a father, he looked like a madman bargaining with God. "Dae-hyun." Nina tried to sit up, but her body failed her. She collapsed back, sobbing. Is he?" "Quiet," he roared, not in anger, but in desperation. He placed 2 fingers on the baby's chest. He began compressions. 2 fingers. Gentle, rhythmic, terrifying. He lowered his head, covering the tiny mouth and nose with his own, breathing air into the silent lungs. 1. 2. Breathe. "Come on," Dae-hyun hissed, his voice cracking. "Fight. You are a Kwon. We do not surrender. Fight. 1. 2. Breathe." The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 30. It was an eternity compressed into a heartbeat. Nina watched, her hand over her mouth, prayers she had not said in years spilling from her lips. Dae-hyun did not stop. He breathed his own life into the child, willing his heart to beat, willing the blood to flow. "Breathe, damn you." And then, a gasp. A wet, sputtering cough. A tiny chest heaved. And then, a thin, high-pitched wail pierced the recycled air of the vault. Nina sobbed, her entire body shaking with relief. Dae-hyun slumped against the table, his forehead resting on the metal surface for a second, his shoulders heaving. He lifted the baby, wrapping him clumsily in a thermal blanket. He turned to Nina. His eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and something that looked dangerously like love. He walked to her and placed the bundle on her chest. "He fights," Dae-hyun whispered, stroking the baby's damp head with a trembling finger. "Just like his mother." Nina looked down at the tiny face, the dark eyes blinking open, the fists clenched ready to punch the world. He was premature, small, but he was here. He's beautiful, she wept. Dae-hyun leaned down. He kissed her forehead, then her eyelid, then her lips. It tasted of salt and blood and survival. You did good, Nina, he murmured against her mouth. You did so good. The hospital room was a suite, larger than Nina's old apartment. It overlooked the East River, the city lights reflecting off the water like scattered diamonds. It had been 3 days. The baby, Min-ho, they had named him, Brightness and Goodness, was in the NICU. He was strong. The doctors called him a miracle. They did not know his father had commanded him to live. Nina sat in the armchair by the window, wearing a silk robe that Dae-hyun had provided. The police had come and gone. The investigation into So-ra's death was closed. The intruder, So-ra's brother, was dead, killed in a home invasion gone wrong. Dae-hyun's lawyers had spun a narrative of self-defense that was technically true and legally bulletproof. The door opened. Dae-hyun walked in. He was back in his armor, a navy suit, crisp white shirt, hair perfectly styled. But there was a softness around his eyes that had not been there before. A hairline fracture in the marble. He carried a folder. Nina's stomach tightened. The contract. The doctors say Min-ho can come home in 2 weeks, Dae-hyun said, placing the folder on the table. He did not sit. He stood by the window, looking out at the city he practically owned. That's good, Nina said quietly. Yes. He turned to her. His face was unreadable. It is time to discuss the terms of your departure. The heir left the room. Nina stared at him. My departure. The contract is fulfilled, Dae-hyun said, his voice flat. The heir is delivered. The threat is neutralized. Your father is healthy in Zurich. Your sister has graduated. He tapped the folder. Inside are the deeds to an apartment in Tribeca, the title to a bakery in Brooklyn, and a check for $5 million. It is severance. Nina looked at the folder, then at him. You re-firing me. I am freeing you, he corrected. He put his hands in his pockets, his fists clenched so tight the fabric strained. You were a prisoner, Nina. A victim of circumstance and my own selfishness. You stayed because you had to. Because I forced you. He looked away, his jaw working. I do not want a prisoner anymore. I cannot keep you in a cage and expect you to sing. It was the sacrifice. The somatic language of his body shouted what his pride would not let him say. He was letting her go because he wanted her to stay, but he knew he could not make her stay. Not anymore. Not after they had bled together. Nina stood up. Her body was still sore, healing, but she walked to the table. She opened the folder. The check was there. $5 million. Freedom. A life she had never dreamed of. She could walk away. She could find a nice, normal man. She could bake bread and never see a gun again. She looked at Dae-hyun. He was watching the river, his back rigid, waiting for the sound of the door closing behind her. He was preparing to be alone again. To be the cold king in his empty castle. Nina picked up the papers. Ryup. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Dae-hyun turned, his eyes widening. Nina tore the check in half. Then in quarters. She dropped the confetti onto the table. I do not want a bakery in Brooklyn, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Nina, he warned, his voice low. Do not be foolish. Take the money. I do not want the money. She stepped closer to him. And I do not want to leave Min-ho. Min-ho has nannies. He has the best care. He needs his mother. Dae-hyun went very still. You are the surrogate. Biologically. I am his mother, she cut him off. I fed him from my body. I bled for him. You breathed life into him, but I built him. She took another step. She was close enough to smell him now, that addictive scent of sandalwood and power. And he needs his father. But his father needs to stop acting like a transaction machine and admit that he is terrified of being loved. Dae-hyun stared at her. The mask crumbled. He reached out, his hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing her lip. "I am not a good man, Nina," he whispered. "I am violent. I am possessive. If you stay, I will never let you go again. There will be no second chance to leave. I will burn the world to keep you." "I know," she said, leaning into his touch. "But I've seen you when the world is burning. You did not save yourself. You saved us." She placed her hand over his heart. It was beating fast, a frantic rhythm against her palm. "I do not want a safe life, Dae-hyun. I want this one. With you." He let out a sound that was half groan, half prayer. He pulled her to him, kissing her with a hunger that consumed them both. It was not the kiss of a captor. It was the kiss of a drowning man finding shore. "Mine," he growled against her mouth. "Yours," she promised. For years later the kitchen of the Kwon estate was no longer a sterile showpiece. It smelled of yeast, caramelized sugar, and laughter. Flour dusted the black marble countertops like snow. "Mama. Look. A dragon." Minho, 4 years old and already possessing his father's intense eyes, held up a lump of dough that vaguely resembled a lizard. "It's a ferocious dragon," Nina agreed, wiping her hands on her apron. She was fuller now, radiant, her hair loose and wild. She was not the scared girl in the gray sweats anymore. She was the mistress of the house, and everyone from the head of security to the gardening staff knew that her word was law. "Does the dragon eat knights?" a deep voice asked from the doorway. Dae-hyun leaned against the frame. He had aged like fine wine, the silver at his temples only adding to his authority. He was not wearing a jacket. His tie was undone. He looked at the mess in his kitchen, the flour on the floor, the toys under the table, and he smiled. A real smile. "He eats vegetables," Nina said, shooting him a look. "Only vegetables." "I heard dragons like steak," Dae-hyun countered, walking into the room. He scooped Minho up in one arm, swinging the boy high until he shrieked with delight. "Papa. Mama made bread." "I see that." Dae-hyun set his son down and walked to Nina. He stepped into her space, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You have flour on your nose," he murmured, kissing the spot. "You have a board meeting in an hour," she reminded him, leaning back into his warmth. "Cancel it," he said, nuzzling her neck. "I'd rather stay here and watch you bake." "You see, not cancel the board. I own the board. I can do whatever I want." His hands tightened on her waist, that possessive instinct never fully gone, just softened into protection. "And what I want is right here." Nina turned in his arms. She looked at the men who had bought her, trapped her, and then freed her only to be captured by her in return. She looked at her son, playing with the dough, safe and loved in a fortress that had become a home. "Are you happy, Dae-hyun?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the kitchen lights. He thought of the empty years, the cold ambition, the silence. And then he looked at the chaos of his life now. "I am full," he said, using the word that meant everything to them. He kissed her, deep and slow, ignoring the flour that transferred to his expensive shirt. "I am finally full." Outside, the autumn wind blew through the trees, but inside, the fire was warm, the bread was rising, and the Kwon family was exactly where they belonged.